Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening, goeienaand. En shalom, goeie mense. Welkom na nog een episode of the Big Daddy Liberty Show. It's a Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. You know what that means. Your favorite midweek show is on. My name is Sikhle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. I hope the sound levels are pashash, for I am still trialing a new way of recording the show. Still using my phone, believe it or not, but using the back camera as opposed to the front-facing one. So get your comments in tonight. It is a completely interactive show. You are part of the show tonight, and is it going to be quite a hell of a show? I have a very interesting lineup of guests. Thank you, Gerry Welgemoed, by the way, for that confirmation that the sound is perfect. Excellento. As I said, I have a very interesting panel tonight. The boys from the Institute of Race Relations are in the house. They will assist us tonight in unpacking some of the election data tonight. We'll do a deep dive into the data set, and that's why you are instrumental in that process. Maybe you are in a part of the country where the results aren't quite ready yet, or maybe you're in a part of the country where the results are fully in, and you now want to get a sense of what the politics will shape out and look like in your part of the world. Make sure you're in the comment section, and remember, as I always say, your price of admission here at the Big Daddy Liberty Show is just hitting that like button. Do it now. Hit that like button and make sure you tell your friends that the BDL show is on. Welcome to it. As I said, my name is Sikhle Ngobese, Big Daddy Liberty. Let's get this conversation going. And guys, get yourself something hot and delicious of warm te because we are going to take a bit of time to unpack this data. We're here with you for an hour or so. And with that being said, you're probably wondering, who is this we that I'm referring to? Well, as I said, the Institute of Race Relations is in the house. Let me introduce Marius Roodt, who, of course, is not a stranger on the show. There he is on screen. Marius, good evening, and welcome to the BDL show.
How's it, Sikhle? Glad to be here.
Good to see you, brother. Just raise your volume so we can hear you better. I'm going to bring in Marius's colleagues, of course, also people who've not been a stranger to the show. He's one half also of the two crickets in a thorn tree or thorn bush. I always butcher that. Let me bring him on. Nicolas Lorimer, there he is. Nicolas, do you want to just quickly correct me?
It's thorn tree. It is thorn tree.
There we go. I knew I had it right the first time. Welcome. There he is on screen, Nicolas Lorimer, and of course the other half of his who helps him host that show, and someone, of course, who is quite a regular on the Daily Friend. Remember, the Daily Friend, your source for news, analysis, and opinion at www.dailyfriend.co.za. I'm talking, of course, about Gabriel Crouse. There he is, popping up on screen. Homie, good evening.
How to do, Sikhle? How's it, guys? Oh, what a week,
good to see you. I was about to say, good to see you. Fellas, I want us to hop straight into it. And perhaps, given the amount of sheer data that one can go through in having tonight's conversation, let's focus on the metros first. And we'll then sort of look at the more interesting areas. And also we'll be guided by the audience as to where and what we look at and the sort of political analysis from there. But before any of that, fellas, your overall assessment of this election, there's a lot of noise, of course, leading up to it, including the IRR running a campaign, to prevent what was the attempts then to delay this election. Marius, this election finally just going ahead.
Yeah, I think it was a good decision by the Constitutional Court to force the IEC to go ahead. There was no constitutional mechanism whatsoever for there to be a postponement, and the IEC's worries about that there was going to be we're going to be in a period where there's going to be high rates of COVID infection and so on, or worries about that was proven to be unfounded. I mean, we having levels of COVID infection. Last time we saw these levels was in April, before we were even in the first wave. So I think it was a very good decision by the IEC to go ahead with the election. And it was held on basically the last day that it could legally be held, was the 1st November. So because according to the Constitution, each municipal term or term of any legislative body is 5 years and 3 months, I think. And so from when the terms end on 3rd August 2021, 1st November, that would have been 5 years. 1st November 2021 would have been 5 years and 3 months. And that was the last. Yes, exactly. So it was the last day they could have held it. But overall, I think this election, I mean, it's a terrible election for the ANC. They've done, let me actually qualify that. It's been a terrible election for the ANC in the metros, in KwaZulu-Natal, in the Western Cape. But if you look around the country, it's still the biggest municipality in every province except for Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape, and the Western Cape. In the Northern Cape, Free State, Mpumalanga, Limpopo, and Northwest, the ANC is the biggest single municipality, biggest party in every single municipality. A lot of these municipalities, it's fallen under 50%, so it might be kicked out by coalitions of other parties, or itself will need a coalition to govern. But it shows you how sticky the ANC support remains. So, I mean, that's something that opposition parties need to think about, and I've mentioned this elsewhere. It seems to me that DA voters are a little bit less loyal than ANC voters. We've seen that in the rural Western Cape. The DA got kicked out of, or the DA lost its majority in a lot of rural municipalities in the Western Cape, and these are even, I think, was a couple of municipalities even that were ranked in the, they got clean audits. They're ranked in the best municipalities in the country. The DA lost the majority there, and we see the ANC. You get these places where service delivery has completely collapsed. There's sewage running through the streets, and the ANC is still getting 55-60% of the vote. So they're obviously doing something right compared to the DA. And I think DA voters are just, in general, it seems, a bit less loyal than ANC voters.
Well, I think there is a large element, when it comes to you, Gabriel, but there is a large element of it which perhaps speaks to what politicians sometimes forget. That people are more than just, glad or happy for a clean audit. There are more maybe sentimental issues that help people decide how to vote. Gabriel, even as I come to you, I must come back for a moment and speak about really the hard-fought battle that led to even us having this election. I think, South Africans sometimes have a bit of a goldfish memory, where we just sort of glance past things and we forget just how much of a struggle something may have been. We really did face a situation where politicians, and maybe even with assistance from the IEC, tried to have this election not even happen at all.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy, and I think it's especially remarkable if you compare the conversations we've had in the build-up to this election to international experience. Over 100 countries have had elections at a national scale during the coronavirus pandemic, and I've looked into the politics of at least 40 of them. And in all of them, COVID, the government's response to COVID, lockdowns, were they good or bad, vaccine programs, all of this kind of stuff was heavily debated. In South Africa, the government, the IEC is part of the government, by the way. It's called Independent Electoral Commission only in the news. In court documents, it's called Electoral Commission. There's no I in IEC because it's a government institution. Okay, which is the fact that everyone still calls it the Independent Electoral Commission is one sign of where we're at. There was no debate about the fact that the government tried to postpone this election. It tried to do so on a basis that would put that postponement indefinitely, as long as there's COVID, and there's going to be COVID. We've known this since January. There's likely to be COVID forever. The IEC was told, the Moseneke report was told by every non-government scientist that most likely October, November was going to be a trough after the third wave. And so it was going to be likely a safer time. Not all of the scientists said this. All of them said it would be a trough. And the most respected scientists said, so it's likely to be a safer time to have an election than January or February or March or April or May or June or July, which is when the ANC and the EFF and the IFP were asking the election to be held. The IEC heard that. They heard the scientists say, now is going to be a better time. And they still said, no, let's postpone it until February. And if they had managed to succeed in that postponement, it would have been postponed again and again, because they would have said, look, we can postpone it just in case we're not sure, and we're not sure just in case not everyone is vaccinated. So they would have put themselves in a position where they can either mandate vaccines for everyone, or there's no election until 2024, or until COVID goes away, which is not going to happen. That's the position they were trying to put us in, against the best scientific advice. And it was a serious struggle. I remember the day that the Moseneke report came out, I wrote a press briefing for the IRR, criticizing its ignorance of the science, criticizing the way that, and you know, Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke, just about the most respected senior political figure in the country. He was once a justice, obviously. After he retired, he sort of campaigned on some books, and Ramaphosa appointed him to be a special envoy into other countries in Africa, which kind of turns him into a political actor, even more unanimously respected than Ramaphosa himself. So it is a difficult thing to criticize, and everyone is very worried about COVID because we were in a plague. So it's difficult to criticize, but we looked at the facts and we stuck to our principles, and we said there's no ways that you can postpone this election. That was difficult. The next thing that was extremely difficult was in Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma proclaimed the election before there'd been an in-person voter registration weekend, which would have disenfranchised hundreds of thousands of people. Hundreds of thousands of people. Also made it impossible for for even more people to vote where they're actually living, and would have kept them stuck in their previous place because they wouldn't have had a chance to change. We called that irrational. We said that this is an irrational action. This is an irrational act of executive power. It's unconstitutional, invalid. There's no way it can stand. Again, we were I sent that press release out the very next morning, and we got a few radio interviews and TV interviews, and everyone was very hostile, and they were saying, how can you say this? The media was listening to her. She said, no, I have to do it. I'm legally obliged to proclaim it now, because if I wait forever, then it's a problem. Of course, she could have waited forever. That would be a problem too. But there's such a thing as too soon and too late. She went too soon. That was our counter argument. People were struggling to listen, but we persevered, and we eventually took those arguments to court, and we won, and we had the attempt to steal our votes overturned. It's amazing, given that most countries people debate about COVID. It's amazing to me, and a huge missed opportunity, that none of the opposition parties ran on this. The ANC tried to steal your vote. Think about that on the day that you get the vote. It's a huge missed opportunity, and it speaks to the kind of lack of imagination that I think does hold people back. But the broader point that Marius makes, that ANC support is sticky, I think, and your reference to the fact that it's, you know, as much as we speak about the meat and potatoes issues, there is a sentimentality. The way I think about it is that there's a theatricality. We live our lives in private. We have reasonable conversations around the dinner table, around the water cooler at office. Now we don't have water coolers anymore, so we rely on Zoom and WhatsApp groups. But the level of honesty on a WhatsApp group in South Africa, and the level of perspicacity and understanding of what's going on, I find to be extremely high. And this is anecdotal, but it's also reflected in our surveys. A different kind of theatricality steps in the moment other people can see what you're saying, the moment you're in the public square. So privately, I think a lot of South Africans find it very easy to criticize the ANC. And we see that in the fact that their approval ratings are even lower. They're in the 30s, and they've gotten in the 40s. But when you're outside in the public square, to criticize the ANC immediately exposes you to those loudmouths who say, if you're critical of the ANC, then you wish that apartheid didn't end. And as a matter of fact, that's just crazy. But as a matter of theater, as a matter of how it looks, just for someone to say that to you, and for others to see that being said about you, that you're a traitor, or, you know, that you don't, it can be very harsh. And it can be the kind of thing that switches people off. And so, you know, I think people don't always speak their minds. And I think when they're watching television and listening to the radio, they're listening to professional experts of not speaking your mind. Yeah. Even to the point where those guys have brainwashed themselves into believing that actually the new dawn is already happening, or it will happen tomorrow, whenever tomorrow is. There's like there's a problem there, and the old-fashioned word for it, by the way, is just hypocrisy. When you're one thing in private and another thing in public, that's just hypocrisy.
Let me come in here, because what I really want, even as I come to you, Nick, what I really want you to do, and let me actually put it up on screen, now that I'm sort of at this point. Let me put it up on screen. I really want us to start unpacking the stories of the metros, because there's three distinct stories here that I want us to unpack as we look at the data. Number one, the metros. I don't care who you are. As a South African, you're looking at the results right now and you're thinking, where, my man, deja vu. We've seen this before. If anything, these results are now usher in phase 2 of the hard slog, so to speak, insofar as the negotiations around coalitions and the egos, the clash of the egos. But before we get into that, let's look at the one metro, perhaps, that has a stable government. We'll begin in the Western Cape in that regard. Let me bring this up on screen. I'm hoping it will work. Nicholas, I'm going to come to you first. There we go. Just for your thoughts. City of Cape Town. Here it is in all its glory so far, as the votes have been tallied. I don't know if it's 100% yet. Let me go to my better thingy here. Let's see here. I'm not sure if 100% of the votes have been tallied yet.
I think it's so about far, 65 or so.
Yeah, sorry, I just spotted it now. I was about to say, so far, the DA can be happy, can it not?
Yeah, I think in Cape Town, they can be pretty happy. They lost a little bit here and there to new groups. There's this interesting one that one of our colleagues who stays out in the Cape Flats in Cape Town actually flagged to us a while ago, the Cape Coloured Congress. They, I suspect, were hoping to take a huge chunk of the Cape Flats, but in the end, they're just going to get a couple of proportional representation seats. Good has not done that good, despite Patricia de Lille, being in cabinet and maybe claiming that she actually had some real clout at national level, which has kind of been, I think, her pitch now. The Good campaign was really incomprehensible. I saw a Good ad which said the DA are traitors because they go into coalition with the ANC or something like that, or a vote for the DA is a vote for the ANC, as Patricia de Lille sits in cabinet. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that. But I think the DA will be pretty happy with what it's done in Cape Town. It's dipped a little bit, but it's pretty solid there. It's fended off most of its challenges.
Which brings me, fellas, to and Marius, I want to come to you here, because let's unpack a little bit some of the players here. And I think who Nick is spot on in raising some of the contradictions and the weird campaigning we saw in this part of the world. 65% of the votes having been tallied, the DA having been touted as, it's going to be a bloodbath for them, we were told. But, they're sitting on 61% at the moment. The previous election, they got 66%, so 2/3 of the electorate. I'm sure they're pretty chuffed. But before I get into that, let's look at other parties here. The EFF, the ACDP, the Freedom Front Plus. I raised these three because in other parts of the country, they're doing pretty well.
I think the Freedom Front Plus especially is doing pretty well. It's I know in a couple of places, I think Northwest, 1 or 2 municipalities is actually going to be the official opposition. It'll be the biggest opposition in a couple of municipalities there. EFF, they actually, I think, even though they've gone up compared to 2016, I think they're going to be actually they're not going to be that pleased with their results. They've, in Limpopo, which is one of their strongholds, they've actually gone backwards compared to 2016. And at the moment, they're only sitting at 22% in Polokwane when they got 30% in Polokwane in the last election. So overall, I think they've gone a bit backwards. But just one point on Cape Town. In the 2006 election, the ANC got nearly 40% of the votes in Cape Town, while the DA got 42%. Now, the ANC is sitting on 13% of the vote. And I think people tell you that, South Africans they vote along race lines, and they're worried about, they're not going to vote for people who don't look like them. That's why the DA is mad for having white males in their leadership group and what have you. But I think Cape Town actually shows this isn't true, because since 2006, there's been large numbers of people who've moved to Cape Town from the Eastern Cape. Generally, they're most likely going to be people who traditionally were ANC supporters. But I'm sure if you look at the demographics, the number of Black South Africans that live in Cape Town has increased probably quite a lot over the past 15 years, and the proportion of white South Africans living in Cape Town has shrunk probably by a fair amount. But we still see the DA is still by far the strongest party in Cape Town. So that either tells you two things: either people who are coming from the Eastern Cape are not voting at all, which I don't think, or they are happy to vote on policy. They can see Cape Town is run fairly well compared to other parts of the country, and they give their vote to the DA. There's obviously not to say that everybody who comes from the Eastern Cape is only going to vote for the DA. We still see in areas like Khayelitsha and Gugulethu and whatever that the ANC does fairly well, and they win quite a few wards and so on. But I think it shows you that the DA has done something right in Cape Town, going from a 40% party to a 2/3 party, and now still a 60% party. So it's done. I mean, Cape Town's remained a stronghold, even though it's gone backwards in quite a lot of the rest of the country.
Well, even as I'm saying that, I'm busy scanning over wards in, the Cape Flats areas. These are some wards in Mitchell's Plain, Ward 75, 81, and the DA is still showing a very strong, making a very strong showing. I mean, look at Good, for example. We were told in the run-up to this, Patricia de Lille, being a colored woman and understanding the colored vote, we're told, would just do a clean sweep of the Cape Flats. Marius, this banal and asinine insistence in South Africa of, again, viewing people's votes through the race lens, eviscerated here.
No, exactly. It shows you, and I'm sure if you go look in Joburg, people who voted for the DA, they didn't say, oh my goodness, I'm going to vote for Mpho Palatse because she's a black woman. They can vote because I want the DA to be in power. Or, a person who's a DA voter didn't say, oh no, I'm a white male. There's no ways I can vote for a black woman. It's completely ridiculous. But just on one point in the Cape results, the Cape Independence Party. If you look at Twitter, I think it's very similar to the EFF. If you are only on Twitter, you would think that EFF is going to would have won this election, and you'd think that the Cape Independence Party was about to, take every municipality in the Cape. But I think they only got about 0.6% of the election, of the votes. I know Gabriel's got a different view on this, and he thinks that the Freedom Front's its increase was partly because it's explicit support for Cape secession. But I don't think that's correct. I think most people who are voting for the Freedom Front Plus, we've already seen the Freedom Front Plus has, been on the charge since 2016 already. 2019 especially saw how it increased its vote share. And there was, the Cape secession issue was really not as prominent as it is now. Maybe one thing where we can say that the Cape secession people have done well is that they have shifted the Overton window, and people are now talking about this Cape secession issue, even though they did. Yes. I mean, I think they got 0.6% of the vote in Cape Town, which means they'll get at least one seat, maybe two seats, depending how everything once the dust is settled. Out. So yeah, exactly. So I mean, so they've gone from not having an area representation anywhere in the country to having a seat on the Cape City Council, and depending how that goes in other municipalities in the Cape, they might get a seat or two in some other places. So I mean, from that point of view, they do have some formal public representation now. But yeah, I don't think there's a difference between what you see on Twitter and what comes out of the ballot booth.
Absolutely. Fellas, I'm going to zoom out of Cape Town for a moment. Goodness me, do I remember how to do this? And maybe as I struggle to do that,
at the bottom, maybe lower rather than higher. At the bottom of the thing, you can click back on South Africa.
Thanks, Gabriel. I'm going to look at the Western Cape generally, and we'll zoom into some areas where we've seen the party, the Western Cape, the DA, effectively take a bloody nose or a punch to the nose and have a bloody nose. Let me zoom in here first, the sort of Cedarburg municipality. Let me just go back into this little window. Goodness me, just again, the development seemingly being, is this Cedarburg? Yeah, I'm right. The development being the growth of these almost locally based residents associations or very local issues-based parties. For example, in Cedarburg, the Cedarburg First residents, 27% of the vote, not bad. Gabriel?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to make head or tails of this, in part because it's hard to tell how much, these independent or local area groups, each one is slightly different to the next.
Yeah.
And I haven't managed to put my finger on the thumb of what has drawn the appeal to that Cedarburg unit. If I'm not mistaken, Cedarburg was one of the top-ranked local administrations, and this is going beyond just sort of clean audits, but actually to whether services are being well delivered, according to News 24. So it's not clear to me that the Cedarburg shift is based on a credible promise of better service delivery. It might either be based on some kind of social identity politics or on a dissatisfaction with how the DA has been politicking at a national level. And so finding, well, if we think we can get the same level of quality service, but from a group of people that in terms of the stylistic points or the theatrical points or the symbolical points and sentimental points, whatever it may be, whether that's going to make us more satisfied. I think that it's also just worth noting that the DA did take a bit of a bloody nose in the Western Cape, but early reports of its demise were premature, in the sense that a lot of people were focusing on their DA numbers yesterday when they were sitting sort of just on 50% in the province. And as we can see, they've climbed substantially since then, from a sort of 13-point drop to about a 7-point drop. So that drop has almost halved as more of the votes have been counted. So these stories are slightly more isolated than I think people might have gotten the impression if they tuned in to the mainstream yesterday. But still, it is very serious. And here in Prince Albert, Lorimer might know better than I about the KGP, but I think the Patriotic Alliance, while we're looking at it, if I can just say a word on that, Gauteng McKenzie is a fascinating character to me. When I was in matric in high school, I was a fan of the theatre. I've mentioned that word a few times now. And for my matric drama practical, I actually wrote a play about Gauteng McKenzie, because he was my hero. The story of this terrible gangster who was rapacious and a murderer who saw the light and really committed himself to following a good path. This was before politics. This was just when he was kind of a motivational speaker. I thought it was very important. In America, there's lots of turnaround stories. Everyone has a celebrity that fell and then rose, or a superhero or something like that. In South Africa, we didn't seem to have a lot of those stories, and his fascinated me. So I go into my analysis of the Patriotic Alliance with a great amount of sympathy. But if I look at their performance, where they have managed to govern, which is very limited, but they've been badly punished by voters, which I think is a strong indication that they haven't governed well. And if I look at the machinations and the rhetoric that the Patriotic Alliance has espoused, it just seems to me like part of an interesting development in South African politics, alongside the I think the Coloured People's Party, as Nick was mentioning, of a kind of rise in coloured nationalism. Now, this is a minority of coloured voters have bought into this. There is no coloured vote. Everyone's an individual, and people are going different ways. And if you just look in terms of numbers, most coloured people are in the Western Cape are voting for the DA, and in Gauteng are voting for various parties. It's very well split. But that being said, in South African politics, I think everyone's familiar with white nationalist politics. That is what defined the occupants of Pretoria and Cape Town for almost a century. And I think we all have a good understanding of what black nationalist politics looks like too. Coloured nationalist politics is something new under the sun. It's quite fresh. I think it's quite interesting that it's had an early success, but I wouldn't be surprised if it falls into the same trap as the EFF, which is that you can get that 10% which is largely comprised of sort of quite angry people, quite vocal people, not necessarily very practical people, but very commanding people who are just yearning for some unit to gather around in the pursuit of power. But I think it's difficult to grow beyond that because most South Africans, black, white, Indian, colored, most colored South Africans, just like everyone else, are very common sense and are kind of put off by the long-term outcome of a fractured society where everyone votes by race, and those who get the most votes do the most damage. Everyone's really coming off second best in that scenario. And in the short term, if you've got a political party storming ahead, and managing to gain control, but they're not exercising that control to deliver services, then you're not going to grow either. So it's an early spring moment, but I expect that this will be more or less as good as it gets for the PA and for Good and the like.
I'm going to come to you, Nick, and I'm going to zoom out. We must move on, and maybe what I was doing just as everybody was talking was flighting the various rural municipalities in the Western Cape. And I purposefully did that because there's almost a contrast to an extent where in the Western Cape, the DA seems to be, fighting a battle of dealing with multiple political parties that it might seek to now have to go into coalition with. But in other parts of the country, there's a different story the DA is notching up when it comes to the rural vote, and that will be in KZN. But we'll get there in a moment, Nick, so just hold that in mind, please, because on the way to KZN, let's pass through the Eastern Cape. Remember, I said we'll begin with the metros, guys. And insofar as the metros are concerned, sorry, this takes a little bit of a moment to load. There we go. When it comes to the metros in particular, as soon as I can find my way here, there we go. Here's Nelson Mandela Bay, PE, aka Gqeberha. DA at the moment sitting at the DA at the moment sitting at 39%, the ANC at 40%, neck and neck at the stage. But Nick, it must be said, slightly disappointing numbers from the DA, given that a lot of the rhetoric before the election was it was going to win it outright.
Right. So, yeah, I want to make a couple of points here. Firstly, as for how we're watching this, so we're starting to get to the stage. I mean, quite a few of the votes are still outstanding in the metros. So we can't quite say exactly what's going to happen yet. But it's time to start looking at how many seats each party is going to get. And that's going to determine what shape and what possible coalitions can exist. But I just want to say, here's the larger point about the three metros the DA took in 2016 and went into coalition with a huge number of parties, but most importantly, the EFF to take over. And that is every single one of those municipalities where they went into coalition with the EFF, they have gone backwards. Or they have lost momentum, or they have struggled to deliver services, or they've damaged their reputation. And I saw a news piece, I think yesterday, of Musi Maimane angrily declaring on Twitter, "Steenhuisen, keep my name out of your mouth. This has nothing to do with me. It's all to do with you." The decision to go into coalition in those three metros, which has been possibly the worst mistake the DA has made in the last 5 years, on a strategic, on a sort of tactical level, was Musi Maimane's. There was some opposition against him in the party, and he chose that. So don't fall for his tricks there. But I think the DA is not going to be too happy, and Helen Zille in particular is probably not going to be too happy with what's happened at PE. She, for example, was actually sent there to focus on their campaign. So we don't know the final result. The DA may end up doing a little bit better than the current results suggest, but really not great for them. And it's going to be very difficult now in this city and in a lot of municipalities to actually cobble the thing together. The DA is saying that they're not going to go into coalition with the ANC. They're saying they're not going to coalition with the EFF. Well, what does that mean? If the DA if the ANC and the EFF can't make a majority coalition together, they're going to have to govern the city with a minority. And that is going to create some very exciting politics. I wouldn't be surprised if we see riots, protests, people walking out of things, the province trying to put cities under administration, bills not being paid. Just strap yourselves in. The next couple of years are going to be a little bit spicy, I think.
Marius, let me come to you because the point...
Can I interject with a small point on
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. I just want to point out that under our constitutional framework, which we studied a bit in going to the Concord to try and save the vote, I discovered that the Constitution basically envisages that if a municipality, whether it's a metro, a district, or just a local council, can't get their act together, then this should fairly rapidly trigger a snap election. So, people might be used to seeing this in the UK, where if there's a minority government, then things can go ahead until they don't. And then if there's a problem, then you get a snap election. It's not necessarily every 5 years. It can happen at the drop of a hat. Now, that hasn't happened in South Africa the way it's supposed to happen. For example, if a municipality is not paying its bills, then it should almost automatically trigger a snap election. But instead, what's happened is they've been placed under administration, and then it's often just been held in that place, even though this is not really what the Constitution envisages, for a long time, for years, until the next opportunity for a 5-year cycle election. So I think in the big metros, it might actually be a lesson to us if you find a minority government and it goes along for a year until a point where the EFF members call for expropriating all of the parks in Nelson Mandela Bay and turning them into cattle grazing, which they've often called for, and the ANC then maybe agreeing because they don't want to sound less left than the EFF, and then the majority votes no confidence and basically forces a snap election. That could be an interesting thing. The alternative, and this might happen more in local councils, would be that just more places get placed under administration because they can't pass their budget. And that triggers an administrative opening. And then provinces end up running the show under the ANC, where the ANC can't actually govern at local election level. And I think that would be a very serious problem, but it would again open room for litigation. And in the same way that people have sued local municipalities to be able to provide their own water or their own electricity or circumvent basically the municipality's uselessness, they might then also be able to sue to force a snap election if a minority government can't pass a budget. Just an interesting technicality to keep one's eye open for in the next few years.
And even as you say that, Marius, I'm going to come to you and actually do so as I quickly just glance over to KwaZulu-Natal and specifically eThekwini municipality. This thing, there we go. The eThekwini municipality, there it is. There it is.
Just on one point, we've had 1 or 2 snap elections in South Africa at local council level. We had one in Metsmaholo in 2019, I think. A couple in the Northern Cape and Osterburg and so on. But I mean, it pretty much leaves you with the status quo. Nothing much changes. So, but Metsmaholo was an interesting one where the SACP ran on its own ticket and won about 20% of the vote. So
that's
that
right.
Was, so that was pretty interesting. But if we're looking at Natal, I think one thing, the most interesting thing for me in Natal is the fact that the DA has won its first council outright in KwaZulu-Natal. And I think that is something with the DA will overall be pretty disappointed with the results of this election, but I think that is an excellent result for the DA. They got just less than, just under 50% of the vote there, but just the way the seats being calculated, they get 13 out of the 25 seats on the council. That's in Umgeni municipality, which is Howick and Nottingham Road and so on. So I think that is an excellent result for the DA there, and I think that's testament to hard work of people like Greg Crumbock and Dean McPherson and Chris Papas, who's going to be the mayor there now. There's quite a nice clip of him that's been going around on social media where he's speaking Zulu to he's on the hustings and he's speaking Zulu to a crowd. I mean, my Zulu is not very good, but I could pick up 1 or 2 words talking about work and children and ANC. That was about it. But I'm assuming he was giving a very good off-the-cuff speech there. Yeah, but I
Yes,
think
I've seen that video clip, and it's actually worth noting because one of the tweets I sent out, linking to that clip, that video clip, was this is exactly what saw someone like Chris Pappas and really the DA in that part of the world win the hearts and minds of people. Not just a young white chap speaking in Zulu, but the fact that he's able to articulate issues that are felt by South Africans, in this case in their home language. And again, it almost seemed as if it was that DA that was missing in the rest of the country.
Sorry, just while you're on Mgeni, can I throw in a quick anecdote, which is that
Sure.
just before the pandemic, in I think it was February 2020, or January thereabouts, I was in Mgeni, and I shared a stage with Chris Pappas, and we spoke to the issues of expropriation without compensation and the threat that poses to all members of that community, as well as the country at large. And it was very nice to share a stage with someone who wasn't mincing their words, who was speaking very politely but very forthrightly. And Mgeni is the only, shortly after that, a couple of weeks later, they actually had a march, and they went down. I'm not sure if they went to Pietermaritzburg or they went to the Mgeni town hall, but they had a march against expropriation without compensation. And that is the only march in the country where people have hit the streets from all backgrounds and said, you know what, this is a bloody awful idea. And I was very excited at that moment. And I thought this might be the beginning of a broader movement to not just criticize this in private, but to actually get out on the streets. And then what happened was the pandemic shut everything down, level 5, and we had other issues to deal with. But I hope that this victory for the DA in Mgeni can be a wake-up call that, that you can get political results out of speaking to the difficult issues. Again, EWC was not something that was campaigned on very much in 2019, even by the opposition. They kind of let it slide as a thing. But if you speak out forthrightly on the issues that really are confronting South Africans' basic hopes and dreams and putting a lid on them, then I think you can get real results. And if you look, just one last thing, I saw some guy on Twitter, some fancy pants saying, it's Nottingham Road, it's those fancy rich whites, that's why they got through. No. If you look at the actual voting districts that flipped, I went through each one of them. There were voting districts that were voting 60, 70, 75% ANC that flipped in favor of the DA. These were ANC like heartland voting districts that flipped to the DA on the back of, I think, some just seriously good meat and potatoes politics, and more power to them. Sorry.
Absolutely. And speaking about more power moving in a direction other than the ANC, I'm sorry, let's zoom out for a moment, fellas. I'm just keeping an eye on time, guys, so let's maybe move it along. I look at a province like KwaZulu-Natal. The big story, Nicholas, is the resurgence of the IFP. Look at that color, that coloration of the map, basically dominating the north and the west of the province, and even beginning to waft down in nice little dots in the south. The IFP making a big stand in the selection.
Yeah, they're still not back to where they were at their height. If you go and you look at sort of the 2000s, 2004, they were by far and away the biggest province in KZN, the biggest party in KZN. And that really started to kind of come down in 2006. So they haven't quite made up all of that ground yet, but a big resurgence for them. They'll, I think, be very happy with that. It shows that the IFP is a party that you should not count out easily. It is quite robust. And now it's going to put the EFF and ANC into lots of very difficult situations. So if you look at Richards Bay, for example, the municipality, I can't remember what it's called, but the ANC is now due to basically boost by both the DA and the IFP has now gone below 50% in terms of seats in that municipality. And that means they're going to have to get into bed with the EFF to govern it. And there are a lot of municipalities across the country where that is the case. And this makes life quite difficult for both parties because the ANC and EFF have been doing this thing where the EFF drags the ANC to the left And the EFF pretends like it's opposing the ANC, but really all they're trying to do is sort of accelerate the ANC's program. So they've been working this kind of double game of working together, but also pretending like they were against each other. Now, for the ANC to maintain any kind of stable government in an enormous number of municipalities across the country, KZN being one of the places where this is going to happen, but also in Gauteng is the other place where it's going to happen, and even in some northwest municipalities and some Free State municipalities possibly as well. They're going to actually have to get into bed together, and Julius is going to find calls from his own party to encourage this, because of course there'll be EFF people demanding their turn to eat, so to speak, and there'll be a lot of pressure from the ANC to go into coalition with the EFF because they need to maintain control to keep the patronage network going. So they will have to shed the pretending to be opponents thing. And I think that that's really going to damage them both. It's going to damage the ANC because it's not going to help them. They're going to have to run these kind of chaotic municipalities, which EFF policy will make even worse. And it's going to hurt the EFF because they're just going to become very obviously the lackey of the ANC that they have been since Zuma left office.
Finish your point, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I wanted to get into a separate issue here very quickly. Chaps, the story of KZN is not over, because I must come back to eThekwini, which is where I really wanted to begin this conversation. And there's two narratives that you're seeing on social media at the moment by an ANC that's tearing itself apart in this province between, of course, the Zuma / radical economic transformation faction, which is arguing and boasting, oh yeah, this is happening, they say, because they wanted to punish the Ramaphosa ANC. So this is all they're doing, they'll tell you. But the one thing that narrative forgets is firstly this. This is the Nkandla municipality. You literally had a situation, and I laughed about it earlier on yesterday, where Jacob Zuma stood in line with his fellow residents of Nkandla, many of whom probably would have exchanged pleasantries, shared a joke with him, his usual laugh, but they literally voted in the IFP with a commanding lead in that part of the world. And one of the observations I made was, number one, the myth of Zulu votes, in inverted commas, being yoked to Jacob Zuma is exactly that, a myth. Number two, it does seem, if I go back to that eThekwini map, there it is, it does seem that the electorate in KZN is punishing the ANC for those July riots. Gabriel, then Marius?
Yeah, I agree, man. I think that it's slightly concerning to see. It is early days, but maybe some increase for the EFF, maybe on the back of, I don't know if this is a very cynical thing to say, but if someone managed to loot something or their brother or their sister, and then they get to go and watch the TV, then they think, oh, maybe this EFF thing is pretty good. But again, it's a tiny minority. Most people seem to be switched off by that. And I think that that old phrase, lived experience, people in that part of the country share a lived experience of desolation, of destruction, of a complete breakdown in law and order. And the ANC is not looking so good a few months after that.
Well, I mean, Marius, even as Gabriel says that, projections going forward, especially for eThekwini, is that, and this, by the way, used to be that ANC stronghold. Even as the other metros collapsed for the ANC in the previous local government elections, the ANC still came in at a 60% plus here in eThekwini. But seemingly, even with current projections, the ANC will come in at under 50% in this election. And look at this, Marius. These are those regions. These are those regions of Phoenix and the like, and the DA clean sweeping.
I think it was Nicole Graham. She's the leader of the DA in eThekwini. And she said on Twitter that the DA had won something like 5 or 6 wards off the ANC, where before, and the first time they're going to have these awards. I do think there's something to say. There is something to the Jacob Zuma and the Zulu vote, because we did see when Jacob Zuma did become president, we saw that the ANC vote in KZN did go up quite a lot. And in 2014, the KZN was actually, I think, the ANC's third best province. They got about 64% of the vote there in 2014. 2019, they lost 10 percentage points of the vote and went down to 54%, becoming the ANC's third worst province in 2019 after the Western Cape and Gauteng. So I think there's definitely something to, I'm sure there were some people who decided to vote for the ANC because Jacob Zuma was a Zulu. But now obviously he was kicked out. But I don't think these riots that we saw in July, I don't think they happened because people were upset that Jacob Zuma was now going to jail. I think it was firstly nefarious elements getting involved in there, and then secondly just because we have an unemployment rate of effectively 50%. People,
and a lockdown.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of thing is going to happen. It wasn't this groundswell of popular support for Jacob Zuma. That definitely wasn't it. Maybe you can argue that was the match that was lit was because of this, and some dodgy people used it to get that going. But apart from that, though, I mean, the ANC seen a collapse in eThekwini, and they're definitely going to have to govern in coalition. I think at the moment, ANC plus EFF gives you about 50% in eThekwini, so it's a good chance that could be the governing coalition there, but it remains to be seen. But just that said, also EFF has been doing pretty well in KwaZulu-Natal, and it's best metro in terms of increase in votes compared to 2016. In the other metros, it's actually gone backwards sometimes, or only seen a small increase. I think after eThekwini, Ekurhuleni was his best one, where it went up by about 3 percentage points to 14%. But apart from eThekwini, the EFF's actually been pretty flat in the metros, to be honest.
And that's a story we're not being told, fellas. I'm just mindful of time, and really the conversation must come to the Gauteng province. Perhaps we'll end it off here, and maybe just indulge me with another 30 minutes, please. So let's end at 8:30. If you guys can please indulge me.
No problem.
Guys, let's look at Johannesburg first, because you can't have a conversation about the Gauteng province without having a conversation about ActionSA, the new kid on the block. Let me just zoom in to the city of Joburg in that regard. Look at that. ActionSA right now, pardon me, sitting at third in the polls there, clearly positioning itself to be the kingmaker. Marius?
Yeah, they have done exceptionally well in Joburg. They had some polling that came out before the election, said they're going to win about 30% in Joburg and Tshwane, which was, that was pie in the sky, and it's proved to be. But I think they've done exceptionally well in Johannesburg. They even they've won a couple of voting districts in various parts of the city. And I think what's also interesting is a lot of people would have thought that ActionSA was generally going to take away from the DA. But while it has done so, I think if you drill down into the results, you can see that ActionSA has taken a lot of votes away from in ANC areas. So it's obviously, there's something, I don't know what it is, but Herman Mashaba, it's obviously far too early to say whether his party is actually going to go like COPE, or it's going to be a bit more resilient like EFF. But there's something in his message that people like, whether it's, this kind of xenophobia, by his anti-foreigner rhetoric, or if it's because, he's quite a pro-free markets guy, at least that's his rhetoric, or because he's got this image as a self-made man who, during apartheid managed to build up a business, against all kinds of odds and did very well for himself, or what it is. But he's tapped into something, and it seems that our senior colleague Frans Corneille has spoken about one of the scenarios for South Africa is that a kind of center-right conservative movement, probably led by Black South Africans, will emerge as a real adversary of the ANC. And I think we might be seeing this now with Herman Mashaba. We've spoken about this. Are ActionSA voters, are they actually voting for Mashaba, or they're voting for what they think Mashaba is, which is a kind of a social conservative guy, pro-free markets, non-racialism, anti-corruption. But then we've seen in his actions where he was very cozy to the EFF when he was mayor of Joburg, and we've also seen him on social media when he lets his guard down. He's said some strange things about white South Africans sometimes. So, but I think maybe we've spoken about this before. Gabriel has an interesting anecdote about part of Joburg called the Jewel City, which also Herman Mashaba did pretty well in cleaning up, and that could also be part of the reason why he's done pretty well in Joburg.
Gabriel, I want to bring you in maybe on that particular point. But before I do that, I must come to Nick just very quickly. Nick, the politics of this particular, the city of Joburg in particular, Herman Mashaba no longer has a DA to hide behind, insofar as saying, oh, well, I couldn't do this or I couldn't do that because of the DA and its supposed wanting to focus on cutting grass in Sandton. You'll probably hear him use that refrain quite a lot, and that his politics is pro-poor, he'll tell us. But what exactly does that mean? Because on the one hand, and we must have this conversation because it's coalition, the votes are still being counted, obviously, but the conversation around coalitions is a mature one already. The EFF, the DA has already said it will not go into coalition with either the ANC or the EFF, whereas ActionSA said, no, we just flat out will refuse a coalition with the ANC, but obviously we're open to the EFF. What does that actually mean then for Joburg residents?
That's, I think, a very difficult question to answer. I'm not sure. I think that there's going to be a minority government in Joburg. I think the ANC and EFF may cooperate on that front. My sense of how things are going is that the DA and ActionSA probably won't end up coming to make a deal in the end, especially because it may even be the case that even when they add their votes together, they might not quite be able to take control of the city. Even if you add something like the Freedom Front Plus to that, then they still might not be able to quite make it. So, yeah, it's going to be, I think, a very uncertain time in Joburg's in the next 5 years of Joburg. I mean, the last 5 years, I was there for some of it in the council, and it was pretty exciting then. I think it's going to be even more crazy now. I think Herman will be pretty happy with his takings here. This is certainly better than I expected them to do. I thought ActionSA were going to get maybe half of what they got in Joburg. But it's not as much as they kind of, I think, were hoping. I think we're hoping to displace the DA in Joburg and Tshwane. And at the end of the day, the DA is still the big opposition player that anyone's going to have to talk to if they want to make a deal. So difficult times ahead. I wouldn't be surprised, actually, if the only DA ActionSA coalitions we see are not in Joburg, which I think will be very weird. Particularly because I think Mashaba is very focused on becoming mayor of Joburg. I think that has actually been probably the whole reason he started this party in the first place. And if he doesn't get it, I really wonder what he'll do. He now has to do the very, very difficult task of defining his party, because right now ActionSA has, I think, left it up to the voters for the most part to define the party for themselves. He has to work out, firstly, what his party is actually going to be. How to run it, which is actually very difficult. Trying to herd politicians is much more difficult than trying to herd cats. And he's going to have to deal with things like power and patronage and all these things that are embedded in the very nature of politics. And who knows what the result from that will be. He might be able to wrangle those cats in the end, but he also might go the way of Cope. And so I think it's too early to say exactly what ActionSA's victory means, except that it's important.
But again, Gabriel, Nicholas raises an important point, and I do want to hear that anecdote. And even as you get into it, I'm just going to flip the screen and go to another metro. But it really is the ActionSA show at this point, because I think a lot of people looked at this and they said, if you're an ANC voter, and either A, you chose to be apathetic and not rock up and vote, or B, you looked at the options available before ActionSA, which invariably would have been the DA or the EFF. Maybe ActionSA was that party that, allowed you to switch your vote for the first time ever, because that must be the story if we're being told that ActionSA is winning votes, wards, or for the ANC even.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. And if you drill down into Joburg, I voted in Yeovil. next to Hillbrow, Joburg CBD. You see in 2011, the DA had like a hardcore around 5%. Various areas in the CBD had between 3 and 7%. Then in 2016, that climbed up between sort of 7 and 12%. And then now it's climbed back down to between 3 and 7%. So the DA is back where it was in 2011. There are clearly very poor people in high density areas in the center of Johannesburg who are hardcore DA supporters, and they haven't left. But some of them, that other 5%, has gone off to ActionSA. But the biggest shift is coming from the ANC. You see the ANC going from being in the 50s and the 60s to coming down to the 30s and the 40s, and ActionSA getting 20%, and the EFF sometimes going up, but often just going nowhere. So I think, the sweet side of the story is something like Jewel City, which is there sort of close to Ellis Park, close to Ponte Tower, on Joe Slovo. If you know any sort of Joburg landmarks, it's right in the heart of them. And that area was like a large double city block of decrepit, rotten buildings that had been hijacked decades ago. No one is paying rates and taxes. You actually have these people that are extorting residents for rent, but then they're not paying that into maintaining the building because they don't actually own the building. They're just a mafiosa. And that's a story across CBD, but and it takes a bit of executive action to accelerate the process of declaring those buildings derelict, knocking them down, and then getting a public-private partnership together to rebuild something fresh. And what they did there was build low-cost housing, cheap, neat, actually quite good-looking, a nice little public square they built with some benches and some trees. And they've really been keeping it clean. Some new chicken lickens on the ground floor, a little bit of retail. You can go buy some slops or some plastic jewelry, maybe buy like a vinyl cover. It's like kind of some little artsy vibes. Close to Mabeneng, but not nearly as pretentious. This is really low cost, efficient city building development. And that was the first area that I saw ActionSA actually win that voting district. So I think some people were seeing, Mashaba had pet projects, and Jewel City was the best one. And that you see the results of that, and then you change your vote. To me, that's mature voting behavior. The problem for Mashaba is going to be management. He had a few pet projects. Some of them weren't so great. Kantham Pillay, I was on a show with you, Sihle. I was talking about the bicycles, and all my friends in Hillbrow, 2 years after Mashaba had become mayor, were like, yes, what is this guy on about? All he wants to do is rip up the bicycle lanes that had just been laid out by Parks Tower, and the taxis are actually using those bicycle lanes to park. It's become quite a nice thing, the bicycle lanes. And now he's ripping them up, and the taxi drivers are actually quite angry about this. Like, why? What is he doing? Like, but he gets a bee in his bonnet, and then he commits, even if it's a bad idea. So sometimes it's a good idea, sometimes it's a bad idea. And in the broader politics, the question is the bad idea rather for him to work with the EFF? I mean, I think the DA and ActionSA look like they might have the numbers if they bring in smaller coalition partners to get a majority government. But ActionSA is going to want to say, let's bring in the EFF. We worked with them before. We're happy to work with them again. Even though, by the way, Julius Malema said on TV that Mashaba was just my puppets. I was pulling the strings. I think that's a good enough reason for Mashaba to never work with the EFF again. But anyway, I imagine that the power play is going to be, the DA says we want to work with the Vryheidsfront Front Plus if necessary. And ActionSA saying we're never going to do that. And ActionSA saying we want to work with the EFF, and the DA say we're never going to do that. And then that puts you in a position where if they both stick to their guns, then you have a minority government, probably EFF and ANC. Or if one of them compromises, if the DA compromises and works with the EFF again, I think they're going to bleed hard.
And they know that.
And they do know that. And on the other hand, if ActionSA is prepared to work with the Vryheidsfront Front Plus, I think it'll be interesting to see the difference in how the media addresses that, because I'm sure the media will say, oh, you've betrayed your voters. Those guys in Hillbrow who voted for you, they don't want Mulder to come back now. That's not what they had in mind. But I imagine that most ActionSA voters would not actually be disturbed by that. And those that would, just a final point on this, if you drill down, for example, in my voting district, so part of it's Yeovil on the south side of Louis Botha, which is a main thoroughfare in Joburg, and part of it is Houghton, Upper Houghton, which is one of the most low density, high income, fancy pants places in the city. And ActionSA picked up about 20% there. So those WASPs who voted for ActionSA, they might have a problem with Herman working with the Vryheids Front Plus, but I don't know how that's going to figure in the political calculations.
Can I say something? I think this is a problem that ActionSA is going to have. As far as I can work out, and I may be wrong because I haven't seen the hard data on this yet, but this is based off of some of the voting districts I've seen. This seems to be the case. ActionSA's coalition is made up of voters who think he's Trump,
yes,
voters who want to vote for a black DA, and there's very little overlap between those two groups, and then some socially conservative black voters and some people who I guess you could call the floating opposition. They're like the sort of people who voted for Cope and then they weren't sure who to vote for. Maybe some of them voted for the EFF last time, some of them voted for the DA, and they thought that ActionSA, being the hot new sexy thing on the block, was the thing to go for, and that's why they backed it. And when the turnout is so low, those kind of people make up a much larger percentage of the electorate than usual. So, that's a difficult coalition of people to hang together, and that's what's going to make Mashaba's job so difficult going forward.
And that's why, in my opinion, just to put a bow on it, ActionSA's best hope, in my opinion, is to go after the EFF ANC alliance. Because the one thing that unites all of those groups is that they don't like the ruling alliance. And the EFF and the ANC are the ruling alliance. And this is why Frans Cronje and John Endres, our twin CEOs of the IRR right now, are talking about the ANC as this water buffalo that's been grazing on the small grass, just eating little people, and let me add, defecating everywhere, although that's not how our CEOs put it. And the vision has been that one day over the horizon, Simba will come, a lion will come to eat the water buffalo in one go and take down the ANC. But that day has not come, and it probably won't come. Instead, you have a variety of wild dogs that yap at each other's heels. But if they kind of get their act together, they can take out the water buffalo and its little calf of the EFF. But that's only if they get that bloodlust, that sense of a hunt, that sense of the ANC has dropped below 50%. The ANC-EFF combined has dropped below 2/3. They've actually dropped into about the 55, 57 region. And if we push now, and we push harder against them than we do against each other, then by 2024, there might be room to open the doors of the union buildings to South Africans who really mean what they say and have the ability to do what this country needs from our executive leadership.
And Marius, maybe let me come to you, because on screen, I've just put up the Ekurhuleni results. But don't focus on them for too much. There's a broader question I want to ask you, which is really this. It does seem to me, as we have this conversation about coalitions and the politics around it, and how that's going to play out over the next couple of weeks, that in reality, for some parties, avoiding coalitions might be better politically than trying to force themselves into a coalition, because they maybe would want to demonstrate how they govern. And that might be a bit of a corner that uMashaba is painting himself in, a corner maybe even that the EFF may want to paint themselves in, because hard questions are being asked of the EFF and their particular plateau. Because one of the things they were very much afraid of, that's the EFF, was a newcomer like ActionSA even showing them up to an extent. But maybe that's one element I want you to grapple with. And the other one is really this. It might be profitable, for example, for a party like the DA or ActionSA or even the IFP to actually say, you know what, we're going to sit it out in this election. We're not going to enter into coalitions. And if anything, given that we are seeing that coalition politics or hung councils is how things are going in the future, it might be better for the political party sit back, grow their base, so that they know about the next election, they might even win it outright.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think that's spot on. We've seen what's happened with the DA in coalitions in Nelson Mandela Bay, in Joburg, in Tshwane. It's lost a lot of ground in those three, or not so much in Nelson Mandela Bay, but in Joburg and Tshwane, it's lost quite a lot of ground compared to what it did in 2016. And I think it is partly because they were in quite unstable coalitions. They couldn't do what they wanted to do. They had to do a lot of horse trading and so on. And I think if you're the biggest single party in a municipality, say you get 45% or 40%, and you're the single biggest party, I think you do have something of a duty to at least try form a government. But the DA is not in is not in that position in any of these municipalities. The only municipality that's coming first is Cape Town, and that's where it's sitting on 60%, so it's not going to need a coalition. So I think it's definitely fair for parties to say, look, we're going to sit this one out. It's been a complete disaster before, and let the ANC, they can try run this place, and then, it might benefit them in the next election. But I think also when it comes to coalition politics, I think there's the issue of how mature our politics is. If we look at a place like Germany has been governed through coalitions basically every post-election after every election since post-World War II. There's normally been either the CDU or the Christian Democrats or the Social Democrats will be the biggest party, and they'll have the support of whoever. Normally the Free Democrats, kind of small liberal party. But these have been pretty stable coalitions that have been, been managed to run places around the country or the various states that are in Germany. And I'm not sure if it's an issue of maturity, or if in Germany the various political parties are fairly close to each other ideologically speaking. Yeah, in South Africa, you put a party like the DA, which is pretty free market, broadly liberal, non-racial and so on, with somebody like the EFF, which are, hard left, basically fascists, anti-white racists and what have you. It's actually not going to work where you put them together. And I think that's part of the problem. Maybe somebody like the DA and ActionSA could work better together if we take ActionSA at face value, being broadly free markets, being, also non-racial. As I say, if we take ActionSA just purely on face value. But I think that is part of the issue. I think they're just South African political parties have just such differing visions for what they want South Africa to be. And I think that's often why coalitions fall apart. They just can't decide on some kind of common vision with, certain issues where they differ. But I mean, as like the DA and the EFF have completely opposite visions of what they want for South Africa. And I think that is part of the reason we've seen these very unstable coalitions. And I mean, the issue is, though, for most parties, if you want to get to a coalition in a lot of these metros, you're going to need the EFF, whether you're the ANC or the DA and smaller parties. So I think, the next 5 years are not going to be any less chaotic than since 2016. And if we think things are fun now, wait till 2024 when the ANC is on, say, 45%, the DA is on 25%, EFF on 10, ActionSA 5, or whatever, you Freedom Front plus 4, and we try to cobble together these coalitions. So if you think things are fruity in Joburg now with looking for a coalition, wait till people are sitting at the union buildings trying to put together a coalition.
And guys, maybe as we begin to taper the conversation off, and what I'm doing just as we're talking, because I want us just to go into the analysis now, and just a broad conversation whilst I put various provinces up, and I'll let the viewers chew on that in the background. We don't have to necessarily worry about those anymore. In the title of this video, I mentioned, that it really is at a point now where the story of this election was the hung councils, the coalitions talk, and really a situation of new parties. Guys, let's talk about some of these new parties just very briefly, because I think they are dominating the psyche of the big three to a large extent, especially when you are beginning to then starting to think about coalitions. A lot of these new parties, for instance, are vested interest groupings. Like there's only a certain thing that they care about. I mean, I think there's a lot more of that in the Western Cape, for example. But we also saw some of it in the Northwest, if I'm not mistaken, where, not that it's new per se, but the Freedom Front Plus has found new resurgence in that part of the world, now becoming official oppositions in some places there. Marius, I want to come to you then, Gabriel.
Yeah, I think in Gauteng, they're the biggest single opposition party, so they're doing pretty well. Northwest seems to be the place, and the Northern Cape to a lesser degree, they've been doing all right there. But I think overall, the story of this election is going to be these smaller parties, especially these community interest groups. If you look around, I mean, the Western Cape's a good example, but in nearly every single municipality, we're seeing these local community groups coming together. In Middelburg, the Middelburg and Indrina Residents Forum got about 20% of the vote. Lekwa Community Forum in Lekwa, which is Standerton, they did pretty well. They also got about 20% of the vote. We saw in Maluti up for Fong, which is Harry Smith, a group in there, got about 20% of the votes. MAP 16, they call themselves. But also often, these are people who are former ANC councillors. If I'm not mistaken, the MAP 16 guys in Harry Smith are almost all former ANC councillors. The guy who started the Middelburg and Indrina Residents Forum is a former ANC guy as well. So you've got to take that with a pinch of salt. A lot of these are community-driven groups, but a lot of these are also disgruntled ANC people who are looking for vehicles to carry on being involved in politics. I'm sure a lot of people who do start these community groups, former ANC people, have the best interests of the community and municipalities at heart. But I think a lot of them are just looking for continued ways to tap into the patronage networks that they can get if they're involved in municipal governance.
Absolutely. Gabriel?
Yeah, it's tricky, hey. It's hard to always get a reading on it, you know. So the tiny independent that I know best is the Harry Smith Water Heroes.
Yes.
And you know, Petrus van Eden is a close friend of mine, and sort of followed their story through the years. Arrived on the day that they were actually starting to fix the pipe. I was just popping in for a little hello, and Petrus said, you know, I'm on. Let me send you my GPS pin. So I went in the middle of the field, and there he was with a bunch of people drilling in to fix the pipe, so that Harry Smith could get water after having none for the team to fix the water. They ran as independent candidates, and they had such a good value add proposition, which was, you know, literally Harry Smith had no water at all for 6 weeks, and it had really spotty water for 9 months. And the municipality wasn't doing anything about it. And then a bunch of private residents got together and they fixed the problem. And then, by the way, there was also a problem with the electricity, and the same team fixed one of the substations, then fixed a big transformer station. So they really had a good starting point to say, we've done very well for ourselves. Now, they didn't end up doing so well at the ballot box. They got between 5 and 10% in the 4 VDs where they were running, or the 4 wards where they were running. And what ended up happening in one of those wards is that the DA won, and it picked up a ward council off of the ANC. And for a moment, as the votes were coming in, I was actually quite anxious. Even though this guy's my friend, I was like almost quite angry with him, because I thought if he splits the opposition vote to the ANC, and then the ANC ends up getting like 35, and the DA ends up getting 33, and then the Water Heroes end up getting 10, then that's maybe not an ultimately great outcome for that community. But that's not how it ended up happening. The DA ended up winning. I think that the Water Heroes actually picked off a lot of votes from the ANC, so maybe they helped in that regard. But I think what's exciting about it, what's inspiring about it, is for more people to join civil life, to get past the walls. You know, we live in a country of a lot of walls. For people to get out into the public square and fight for what they believe in. And I think that there are going to be a lot of teething problems. I think Marius is right to point to maturity. You know, South Africa is in a lot of ways a very immature democracy. But the way to grow up, the way to find the best mixture between civil participation and not spoiling the vote, all these kinds of things, the way to do that is to do it, is to try and to make some mistakes and pick yourself up again and try again. The alternative attitude of throwing up your hands, giving up on South Africa, and just trying to milk the state for as much as you can, I think is very tempting. I can see why a lot of people do it, but it's also very short term. You know, we can't actually sustain this country in the way that it's been run. So I hope that these grassroots movements are part of a maturing of South African politics, and that again, to feed back into the earlier point that I was making, that people realize that there's more than one way to skin a cat. For example, when I was talking about the wild dogs in terms of the next level up of small parties, now the opposition parties, you don't have to run the show. A coalition is not the only way to coordinate an attack on the ANC-EFF water buffalo, to use that metaphor. There's also such a thing as coordination, as coordinated opposition, as sitting back and saying, you know what we're going to do is outside of the channels of official government. So like a water hero, I'll fix the pipe, or I'll do what I can in a practical way. And when I'm in council, instead of voting for a budget that I know is going to go to corrupt people, I'm going to vote against it, and I'm going to expose the information there in the council. I'm going to lay the paper trail for the NPA to get involved if need be. I'm going to go and speak out to the public to make them aware of what's going on inside there. Coalition is part of government, yes. Coordination is a huge part of opposition. And that can be coordinating both in a practical sense and in the battle of ideas sense. And I think that's a major part of the route forward. And I just worry that the temptations, it's so, you see that mayoral chain and that very nice big fancy chair can be a hard thing to turn away from. But if you take a long-term view, I think it can be a winning solution.
Can I just quickly make one point about Mabluti Apufong?
Sure.
I think they definitely need water warriors there, because there's something in the water. Because I see Hladi Matsoneng's African Content Movement has won 2 seats in that municipality. So maybe this is Hladi's, long-awaited political comeback.
No, that can't be true.
I promise you, I just went now. I cannot believe it.
Dude, when there's tiny voter turnout, then you
They
only
got 2%,
need...
and they managed. Yeah, they got 2 seats there.
I just want to say, as to my earlier point about ActionSA having a, shall we say, complicated, diverse coalition, I've been watching the comments and I saw someone say that they voted for ActionSA because they thought that Mashaba is basically Trump. And then I saw someone else being outraged at the suggestion, who also voted for ActionSA, or at least supports ActionSA, that Mashaba was Trump. So, yeah, that's not going to be an easy circle to square. But
one of those views are correct.
Well, I was about to say, it speaks to that, doesn't it, though? Fellas, we're in the last 4 minutes of our conversation. Let's do final thoughts. And I want to leave you with this question. There are South Africans who are very afraid of what's about to happen insofar as these coalition talks. And a lot of the fear, of course, is, will we even see service delivery in all of this? Maybe speak to that issue in your final thought. Should people be bracing themselves for just chaos over the next few weeks? And obviously from those few weeks, depending on what coalitions look like, are we heading to another term of government of chaos at a local government level? And maybe speak to me also secondly about the aspiration of some of these political groupings for the next election, the provincial and the national and provincial elections. I mean, Mashaba, for example, has already said, yeah, we're about to hit the ground, he said, for that election.
I went last, so I'll go first, and my point is very short. And it's just this. I think in some ways it'll be more same, to use the late justice's, ex-justice's phrase. However, the thing about service delivery is that a lot of it is about infrastructure, whether it's the pipes in the ground that are taking the clean water to you or taking the grey water and so on away, or whether it's those pipes carrying the electricity, whether it's the substations with their transformers, whether it's the roads. And the thing about infrastructure is that if you don't maintain it, it gets worse. So more same, even if the council's equally inept, you can actually have a precipitous fall off when you reach the shelf life of that infrastructure unit, but it's not being replaced. And South Africa's infrastructure, a lot of it really is in that position. We were seeing comments today coming about Joburg's basic electricity and water infrastructure. You need a lot of actual overhaul just to stay in the same place. You kind of need to sprint sometimes to stay where you really are.
And
so
money.
if it's more and money, and so if it's more same in the city council, then it can be a faster and faster degeneration on the ground. And I think that is a very serious reason for concern.
Yeah, so I think generally speaking, local governance is going to be, for the most part, worse. There might be a couple of areas where it improves, but I think across the board, particularly in the big metros, you're going to have unstable coalitions which can't pass budgets, can't get contracts signed on time, mayors changing all the time, people being fired and rehired. So that's going to disrupt things. Also, because no one has a strong majority, you're not going to see anyone able to overhaul any of the systems, as Gabriel has just pointed out. And quite frankly, the big problem is in a lot of municipalities, there just isn't money available. And when you combine that with the slow growth driven by national policies, the scope for what a municipal government can do in the next 5 years is actually, I think, quite limited until something major changes in the country at large. So I would brace for some pretty hectic local governance over the next 5 years. I think it's not going to be pretty for most people.
And figure out how to fix the water pipe yourself.
Yeah.
Marius,
maybe we'll have a position where these coalition talks drag on for 5 years and no government gets formed, which will probably be good for the various municipalities. I think it was Belgium where the coalition talks form a government went on for 18 months. And I think the Belgian people were the happiest they'd ever been. So, but I think there's going to be pretty chaotic. I don't think much is going to change really. But I just think what the big takeaway from this election, and I don't think we can understate it, is that this is the first time that the ANC has ever run in a South African election and where it hasn't won more than 50% of the vote. And I think that is something we mustn't forget. And that is, I think this is what in the US they talk about realigning elections. And I think this is perhaps the South African one. And I think the ANC is very close to losing its national majority in 2024. And then things are going to get very interesting in the Chinese sense of the term in South Africa, I think.
Absolutely. And fellas, on that note, thank you very much to every single one of you. That is, of course, Marius Roodt, Gabriel Crouse, and, of course, Nicolas Lorimer from the Institute of Race Relations. And I do believe, these will be my two final thoughts, if anything. Number one, Marius's point is a critically important one. This is the first election in this country where the ANC is coming in strongly under 50%. That is a massive shift. Whatever you want to take away in wherever you're particularly from in this country, because yes, there are some parts of the country where the ANC still maintains strongholds, but the overall picture, the overall trend is a good one. We are moving away as South Africans from a single party dominance in our electorate, and that is a very good thing. So that even as you listen to other alternative, media personalities, wanting to play the doom and gloom card, actually take a moment and always have a sense of proportion on things. South Africans are moving away from the ANC. That is a silver lining. And what that tells you is twofold. And this is my bit of analysis on this. What that tells you is twofold. Number one, for you, the individual, for you, the chap living in whatever pocket of the country you're in, you now have fertile ground, very, very fertile ground to influence your neighbor, to influence the next chap in the battle of ideas. What kind of a future South Africa do you want to see? You have the opportunity to influence that chap so that he takes those ideas. In my case, it is the ideas of liberty. The idea that South Africa should be a free, prosperous, non-racial, and property-owning society. Those ideas, I now know I have fertile ground for, because people are willing to act on a change of worldview in the electorate, in the ballot box. And equally for politicians, they now know that given the fact that the voting base is so diverse, they have an opportunity to do the hard work, win hearts and minds, and grow their base, so that when the next election comes, they are the biggest party, if not the outright majority, to win that election. So do not be despair. Do not enter into a state of despair simply because things are where they are at the moment. There is great opportunity for us as South Africans in influencing each other. Don't look at parties like the EFF and worry and think that that's where the majority of the country is heading. It really isn't. And I think the fear of EFF people, and I'm just focusing on them for a moment. The fear of EFF politicians in the moment is that they saw a party like ActionSA rise out from effectively nothing and literally dominate the electoral psyche. And I think that offers you and I something that we too can actually participate in our democracy. And that's the last word I want to leave you with, the notion of participating, because there still is far too many South Africans, 18 million plus South Africans who are eligible to vote, but simply did not and do not show up. So that now you see what that looks like when the results come in and are continuing to come in. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you again to my panel who joined us from the Institute of Race Relations, of course. That is Marius Roodt, Nicolas Lorimer, and Gabriel Crouse. I will see you this Sunday for Liberty and Friends as we maybe continue the conversation. We maybe continue the conversation of the results of this election, and we look at other things at that point as to what made the news week at that point. So with that being said, a big thank you to you guys who watched, and a reminder to you, as I always say at the end of every election, and a reminder at this point, never trust a commie.